Hey, muy buenos días, everyone. I hope everybody doing well, blessed, and enjoying family. As always, muchas gracias to everyone for everyone's words, wishes, prayers, and the love and support you guys share with me. For those just stopping in, do please like, share, and subscribe. And before getting into the story on hand, I know yesterday I was supposed to go live again. That's why I share with everyone the paperwork that the doctor gave me, which was an admission to emergencies. I had to go into emergency because my right lung was failing. It was part of why I was having problems breathing a lot, right? And basically, I had a lot of water too in it, so I had to go in there. They had to resolve it before chemo Monday, so forgive me for that. But thank you God, I'm back home and pa adelante. Well, to get into the story on him, today I want to touch on how everything in prison follows you. It don't matter if you do something in one yard, y todo está bien, everything's cool. It would eventually ricochet if it has something coming. But I want to take you back to Ironwood. On the yard, on a yard, as I mentioned to you guys before. There was a lot of bumping heads amongst cars between camaradas. There was no other raza gang or to beef with, so it was mostly camaradas who split up. Like South Side LA, East LA. You guys get it. IE, Orange County, Bakersfield, and I mentioned before. 805, and including Bakersfield, right? Where they were the main pointers in the issue when they were still claiming 805 against IE, which IE, in Ironwood was deep at this time. At the end of the day, it's their backyard, right? But anyways, I've talked about it, how, within time there was a lot of vatos getting out the shoe, right? That been there for years. They were all little individuals that basically CDC was giving them an inactive chrono and putting them back on the yard. A lot of them would get shot down, but there were a lot of them making them to the linea, right? And of course, being back there, even if they were just taking room back there, they would get to the linea with a collar and a tie, right? Feeling all high power. And sometimes it just led to incidents. As I've told one I had with the vato from Maravilla. I never really I understood what was going on, and in a sense, I understood Maravilla, right? But I was never that individual that tripped on LA politics, right? It was they were there, they were programming, and todo bien, right? But unfortunately, Maravilla has a lot of history, at least when it came to East LA, Southeast, things that around them, right? Anyways, the individual I had problems with just got to the yard and basically he said he had palabra to get the keys from the yard and, you know, being, I'm not gonna say smart, but knowing the ropes, I told him, see, alright, homie, I'll go in and check and if everything's cool, ponle, ahí está, todo es tuyo. I'm not gonna be a bump in the road if it's the Billy's wishes, right? You know, of course, a lot of things go through your head, right? As a llavero, if they're having you step down. But anyways, I already told this, so I just went in, checked, homeboy, nada. It wasn't true to go ahead and send him packing, right? Which I did. They had a Maravilla had about 12, 15 homies on the yard, right? And there had been already incidents that people got corrected Moreover, it was set tripping, right? That it wasn't tolerated. But this incident was with a homie. He was with Equal, but he was from East Los, right? A lot of people might know him. He was big. I mean, he had size, and the only taka he had across his chest was East Los Angeles, right? And but he knew Avato from the streets, right? From Gage, Maravilla, I believe, Chato, and I guess things happen amongst them on the calles, right? Which again should not be brought to a yard. What happens on the calles stays on the calles, right? Nevertheless, some people just can't let go of it, right? And it went both ways. You know, with Chato and the homie from East Los, they were they had it out for each other. You know, it got brought up to me, discussed, and it was that issue. When you get out, go ahead and start hunting for one another and handle your business, you know. In here, just because we're the only raza here, don't mean you could go ahead and do things we are not supposed to, right? Especially the way they wanted it, you know. They wanted just a heads up, you know. And it just brings headaches, especially when they're set tripping on the yard, right? Then Rafla's gonna start feeling some type of way against the next Rafla and vice versa, right? But anyways, in this incident, you know, homeboys, at the end of the day, you know, we're game bangers. And there is people that could hold back and be smart about things. And then there's those that, you know, pride is bigger than anything, even if it's going to cost you your career, right? And homeboy from East Los, he rushed him, right? He rushed Sato. Again, Maravilla had their little car. They used to chill outside a 4 block. And he rushed up in there, and Maravilla was at that time that felt, you know, it was that time that was happening in LA, right, with them. So any little incident that happened with them, they all felt obligated to jump, right? Even if it was camaradas. So that's exactly what happened, right? The rest jumped in and they end up stomping in the homie. You know, with this, a lot of issues were brought up, right? For one, a bus came and there was another couple of homies from Maravilla. Of course, everybody that was in that fight went to the hole, and eventually most of them came back because it was amongst people, right? Because the Hudas, they don't really care that there's issue going on, you know, amongst Maravilla and Sureños or whatever. It should not matter in prison, and we're one, right? And nevertheless, this vato, he got out there and he was in the shoe for a long time, right? And he was Spookie's homeboy, you know. I knew Spooky from YA, you know. If someone knows Spooky from Ben Maravilla, the homie has the best art on his back when it comes to Revolution, right? And this vato, he was from Ben, right? I forgot if they call him Scrappy or Spooky. Do excuse me, but anyways, he got back there with Palabra, and basically he was answering to Chato, and everything checked out right with him. And it was just to give him the authority for Maravilla to do their thing, and if they were going to send anything up, was going to be towards Chato. And if you knew the game at that time, Chato was trying to do things right, and the last thing you would want to do as a Sureño is get in the way of them things, right? For some dumb reasons. So, nevertheless, you know, they started hitting, doing their thing, and there was a good homie on the yard, right? And but he was a clown. He was from East Los, from Choppers. Well, a lot of people, I talked about him before. A lot of people know him, right? Chavo, and he was just a clown, right? But he used to love to drink, and One of the deepest scars on the yard was Easter Lay, just being sincere. And just one day in the weight pile, Easter Lay was pressing for to have homeboy S that had palabra with Chato remove. I'll be sincere with you. Most of the sureños on the yard, the discussion was, all the maravillas should be removed from the yard. And, you know, among discussion, it was, man, fool, you say this again and it's going to cost you. Those are camaradas. Whatever you have going on in your county, as long as they don't come from above, you to respect them as so, right? And it didn't help, that the homies from Maravillas, they were tight, they stayed amongst each other. They hardly did anything. They felt that difference, They never spoke on it loudly, but when things came down to push, they would flex up, as a whole. And nevertheless, when Matos from East LA would bring up, like, hey, them on the streets, they don't want to pay. I would tell them straight up, it ain't my business. On this yard, the Pili that owns this yard says that everything's good, right? They check with Chato, everything's good there, so leave it alone. And anyways, the homie Spooky, would you say Spooky, right? From Ben Maravilla that was in touch with Chato, he didn't look the part, Dispense I say it like that, but he looked skinny, with glasses, no tacas. He just didn't look the part. But again, if you've been beat around the bush, you know better. There's a lot of individuals that hold power but don't look the part. Anyways, homeboy on the yard, be honest with everyone, had a lot of complaints on him. He didn't know how to behave on the yard. I don't know how long he was in the shoe, whatever, but I had a little road dog, you could say, from YA. I talked about him too before, Chato from Little Valley, right? Or Little Chato. And we're taking a lap one day, and he told me, like, hey, that fool must be lying. And I straight told him, nah, fool. Don't misread into something that is just not there, right? I checked, todo está bien. The homies from East LA, you guys are walking on thin line because there's been a lot of whining, right? When it's been said already from Billy's, it should not have been up from discussion, you know? And, but at the end of the day, I told you guys what needs to be done here in the Jardín. You're your own man, though, We're in charge of our own career. So you guys talk amongst each other and either go sit down, discuss things, or do what you gotta do, right? But do know, for one, I have to report it and I have to send in a discipline to you guys from my end. And it ain't cause I don't love you guys or anyway, right? But the homies are camaradas too. And I'm not gonna minimize them on the yard. And I already told everyone. Nevertheless, when you get to the hole back there, you're gonna have problems with homeboy. Again, Chato was trying to work things out. He was sending out homies, right, from Maravilla to many yards to start blending into the power structure on the yards. So Maravilla will start, getting back in the fold. Again, I ain't from LA County. I don't know what happens in county among them or what happened, but it should not matter. It should not be dragged into prison. Period. You know, or even street things. To not make it long on you guys. In the workout over a thing of bars, an argument started. Homeboy, like I said, didn't fit the part right. He didn't even work out like that. I believe he worked out calisthenics in himself, but when it came to the bar work, dips, things like that, I never seen him, right? But nevertheless, he was out there with them again. And a big bro, literally a small riot happened amongst the homies from Maravilla and the homies from East LA. And a lot of things were said. I'm not gonna repeat it, but a lot of things were said. Not just minimizing homeboy, but disrespecting envy, and basically sent homeboy down the tube and said whoever he was with was phony. And you guys get it, right? All that talking out the neck at the spur of the moment, because they really thought homeboy didn't have that power, right? Anyways, there was weapons on in that thing, and you just lift it up in arms against your own round flaw without permission. That alone is you're done. Anyways, they went to the hole. They passed their whole time. Whoever caught a shoot term, I don't know exactly how that 5 year inactive things work, how the chrono, the guidelines they had to follow when they were kicked out. I don't know. Uh, the word that we had, if you were holding anything down, was if them battles come on the inactive, keep him on a loop, and whatever little small dumb thing, whack him and remove him from the program. They weren't looked good because Sacramento or whatever IGI felt you weren't doing nothing, you were capable of being back on the yard. In other words, you just went for a field trip to sit down and take room. That's how it's looked at, right? Nevertheless, a lot of them ended up in Tehachapi, Corcoran, and I'll concentrate on the homie, that I said that had East Los. That was real big, right? The homie. And three other homies that got there to Tehachapi where homeboy was there, right? For those that didn't know, Toro was real close to Chato. I mean, work-wise, and as you guys seen later on, Toro allowed Chato to get in the IE, right? And remove Güero Verde. And anyways, homeboy had the keys, and homies tried to explain themselves, and it didn't work. They had homeboy slam back down when he had a mission to pull for Chato to complete, to help him move the wheel when it came to what he wanted Chato. And you just stopped it by set tripping. Which again, I'll say it, you could be the downest fool for your neighborhood on the streets. You know, you could have your neighborhood tatted 10, 20 times on you. Whatever. But that stays in county and don't follow you in prison. In prison, your barrio is your thing. Nobody else's to know. Nobody else's should care. You're a campolero and you're going to follow rules and regulations as so. No permissions, no out of pockets when it comes to personal stuff, right? Unless you're going to take each other out for reals. And anyways, they went out to yards a couple times, and then eventually they tried to take their wing. But for those that know Chato's orders, he's one of them individuals, that don't like someone to just get whacked. You know, if a camarada's picking up time, if you got steel coming in you to knock your head off, and it was that simple, and it was like a little ladder, it went from Tehachapi to the ones that went to Corcoran, the ones that were able to get out back to the main line in Ironwood, they got hit. And it's basically what I want to open the glimpse into this message, right? Nothing is what you think in prison, and that includes an individual. My next story is going to be about a Pili that a lot of people don't know of, right? Which is Pee Wee from Garden Grove. And we talk about not fitting the part, right? That we have in our head that should be the part. But anyways, again, just follow them, and they were done. There was no comebacks from it. Again, Chato don't want no excuses. He don't want you to walk away from his discipline, period. The cool part about it, everything, is that there was a lot of reports. from the homies from East LA towards Joker. They were doing things for Joker, you know. When they were on the yard, they had the green light to make feria and send up to Joker straight, right, without going through that. But when push came to shove, Joker said they should know better than to play that on the yard. So again, nothing is what we think of prison or what people get out and lie about prison. There is no loyalty there. For a Pili, you see Joker seeing it as they're gonna go and sit down, and what use are they to me taking space? They stop the money flow. I'm not gonna bump heads with my carnal Chato over their stupidity. So he okay for them to go. Again, if you think there's ever gonna be that gracias, I got your back. Like I said on my last story, there is individuals and they're allowed to do so because of their antiquity, but a Tecato mentality would always trump. So I guess I'll leave this with this, right? If you're already on your way or there, handle it. You know, I ain't a smart individual. So if someone like me could line up and do program and rules and regulations and know what to bring to the table and boogie when need to, anybody can. It's possible. But don't go in with the myth that I gotta go earn my stripes. Cause that's where it's at. Cause that's a myth. At all times remember what you're giving up though. You're giving up your neighborhood. You're giving up your family. You got kids. You know it ain't worth it. If you ain't there and you're able to stay good with everything as a whole, do so and work on yourself. You're willing to hit a yard and a stranger tell you, oh, you gotta sell up with your worst enemy. Even worse if your worst enemy's on the yard that took a family member out, but you can't do nothing about it, and if you do, then you're gonna get done to. Stay true to yourself and loyal to loved ones.